If there's one word that can divide this community greater than just about anything, it's not Rotor Riot, it's cloning. And Chris and I talked today about cloning in the FPV industry. Is it worth it? Is it not? How do they handle it? It's a pretty fascinating conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. So let's turn the conversation again. I want to talk about cloning. Because and I'll share a story with you before we get into it. So a friend of mine does product design. He's an engineer. He does product design for NASA. And he would go to trade shows. And he said, starting about 5-6 years ago, maybe a little bit more, you could typically the day before the trade show started, you could walk around and kind of just sort of check things out. There wouldn't be people at the booths. They wouldn't necessarily be, telling you everything about it, but you could just walk around some of the products that were being offered. And he said what started happening was that you would see after like the first year, the second year, you would see these Chinese folks wandering around, and they'd be taking pictures from all angles. And then the booths would start opening the next day. And by the second day, complete replicas of what was being offered would show up on the floor for a cheaper price. And they would undercut the guys that had literally walked in there with, a year or 2 years of R&D. And the cloning machine that China has put in place is just astounding. They are able to take and make clones of just about anything, and this was in aerospace, right? So eventually, folks got wise. They started covering things up. They made it as hard as they could, but they still couldn't stop the cloning. How has cloning affected Armattan?
It has affected us greatly. Mm-hmm. You would say it affected us mainly in two ways. Mm-hmm. One is in our philosophies, mm-hmm. and the way we try to adapt to this, mm-hmm. right? As well in the way that we react to it. Mm-hmm. And then the other way would be, of course, taking market shares away.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I'll give you an example, Michael, and that mm-hmm. might be difficult to believe, but it's true. Mm-hmm. The original Comedian, we're the creator of that frame. Mm-hmm. We released it in 2016. And as of today, sadly, we sold less of them than the cloners did.
Wow.
That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Right. So they're not only taking good shares of the market, but they actually taking the majority shares of the market mm-hmm. on our very own product and designs. Mm-hmm. And it's something that in the past I've reacted very strongly to. On social media, on RC groups, and there's no winning that battle,
right?
Because the argument that people will make anytime you oppose to that is that apparently clones are helping people get into the hobby mm-hmm. By creating cheaper options, which that's debatable, but I suppose there's some merit to that, mm-hmm. a bit to that stance, that opinion. And then the other problem is that if you, which I've made that mistake multiple times now, if you berate or get angry with people who support right. clones, then you're labeled as someone who lacks professionalism, mm-hmm. right? And you should not talk to people like that because you're essentially alienating people who may eventually decide to go for the real thing and buy mm-hmm. Armattan. You mm-hmm. piss them off at the start because they're flying a clone, and you oppose to them or make them feel like they're wrong or doing something wrong. Mm-hmm. It's a losing battle all around. Sure. It's something that you don't learn overnight. Something that you have to make the mistake to put your foot in your mouth 1 or 2 or 3 too many times before you realize that, mm-hmm. look, it's not going to work to try and change the way the world works,
right.
or try and change people's minds. Mm-hmm.
What
we have to look at is that, this is a reality that exists, mm-hmm. and how we're going to operate as a company to A, trying to, essentially convince people to get on board with us.
Right.
And of course, B, create product that will appeal enough to people so that we're able to overcome the market shares that we lose by being cloned all the time, which we are. Yeah, everything we make gets cloned. I mean, the only thing that hasn't been cloned to this date, I'll knock on wood here, is the 6-axis milling of titanium. They think it's too expensive now. It's something that they're unable to produce it at a low enough cost in order to make a clone appealing. People won't buy the clone if it's only $10, $15 less than the original. Is what it comes down to. Yeah. And another thing is that it's a lot harder to copy. You can copy a 2D flat piece of aluminum. Easy. That's easy to copy. Yeah, exactly. But when you get into the 6-axis milling, it gets a lot harder. And so, yeah, luckily now, and like I said, I knock on wood, the two design where we use that type of machining, which is the gecko and the marmot, have not been cloned yet.
Oh, that's amazing.
I don't think the gecko will be cloned now. It's been released long enough. If they wanted to clone it, they would have. Yeah. They did make models that look alike, though. They make models that look alike, and it seems clear that it's at least inspired from the gecko. But at least it's not affecting us on the warranty purposes. We don't have to deal with people maybe perhaps contacting us with a counterfeit trying to warranty it, because we're able to tell the difference.
Right.
And as for the marmot, now I hope I'm not jinxing myself, but because it hasn't been that long we released it, but it has been longer than any frames that have been cloned post-release. So if we're lucky, we'll have the same scenario as the gecko for.
Yeah. Do you think that, and this may seem like a stupid question, but I don't intend for it to be. Do you think that cloning in this industry is still a major problem? Or is it to a degree settling down?
Well, I think that it's a case-by-case basis. And if you ask that to a person, anyone, in fact, that put a lot of time and efforts, even money into producing something, if you ask them if it's a problem, they'll say, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think... it depends on what angle one would answer that question, right? As in, is it detrimental to the hobby? Is it detrimental to the industry as a whole? But I think that, I'll be frank, I think that when it comes to things like electronics, definitely. If you look at, for example, a company like TBS, I mean, these guys are not just making frames now, right? They're making stuff that requires a lot more R&D. A lot more testing, a lot more investment, and a lot, to an extent, a lot more skills to create this equipment. And the cloning industry is really taking away their ability to thrive in an environment, in a good environment of R&D. Right? When it comes to us as frame makers, I mean, yes, it has a similar effect, but at the end of the day, I think that they're only to an extent taking market shares, and they're going to affect our overhead and our ability to do things. But at least up until today, they have not affected us enough to the point where we say, well, we might not be able to create a new model, we might not be able to create something new. I used to be really angry with them, and these days I look at them as more competitors rather than cheaters. People can look at it whatever way they want, but instead of crying foul towards frame cloners, frame cloners, I'd rather use my energy towards thinking, how can we either make it more difficult for them to do that, right? And how can we find ways to overcome that? I think it's a better way to invest our energy than to try and fight that. I mean, there were times where I got on the phone and just screamed at some guy because we actually caught some. We knew exactly which factory. We knew exactly who was cloning our model. I just went completely mad. That person, and I kid you not, I'm pretty certain that the effect it had is to make that person more mad, and that person kind of made a point of cloning everything we did for the following 2 years.
Yeah,
because they can, right?
Yeah.
So is it bad for the industry? It's definitely bad for innovators. There's no doubt about that. Innovators should reap the benefits, the rewards for their efforts. By no means, by any means, but I don't put frame making on the same level as electronics, essentially.
Okay.
Right? It hurts guys who are electronic a lot more.
Yeah. One of the major issues, and I kind of alluded to this, and you've alluded to this, is that so much of the supply chain does run through China. And for better or worse, they've gotten, the folks in China have gotten really good at the game of cloning. Like just taking something and making a copy of it and selling it for a cheaper price. Because to a degree, the supply chain favors them because, as you were saying, there's the Western tax, which they don't have to bear, and therefore they can release something at a lower price. Do you ever see the supply chain moving out of China?
No way.
Okay.
I mean, no way. There's just no way that, I do know that some companies make an effort of making their product outside of China.
Yeah.
But I think based on the competitiveness of the market, based on the influence of the Chinese, and the Chinese offerings on the market, it really puts strains on anyone trying to be competitive, and as such, there's only really one way to be competitive financially, is despite the Western taxes, to get the parts made in China.
Okay.
And when it comes to electronics like motors, flight controllers, for example, we own distribution rights for the CL Racing flight controller.
Sure.
We OEM motors. There's just simply there aren't such infrastructures anywhere else in China, right, that are either willing to take on small contracts like a company like Armattan,
right,
or capable of doing it, right? This is what, so no. And I think that the economy in China is it's almost reminiscent of the economic boom we've seen in the United States years ago, where everything that you had in your house was made in the U.S., whether it was your washing machine, your car, everything, And so they are starting to see a switch in where things are made in the world now, and I think that maybe quite some times down the road, you are going to see a shift again. It's going to go from China to another country, for example, which may have been behind for quite some time, like China used to. But they're
India
not
being a prime example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, but no, they'll have a good run at it first. And I think I'll be dead. I think someone like me, I'll be old and likely 6 foot on the ground by the time such a change like that happens in the world.
For better or worse, the Chinese industrial complex is able to clone, and they do it well, they do it effectively, and they do it in a way that makes things cheaper quite often. As Chris said, the quality is starting to come up, and what's interesting is that some of those cloners are turning into legit frame manufacturers with their own products and their own design. It'll be fascinating to see how that plays out over the next few years. In our next episode, Chris and I talk about the future of FPV, kind of how it's changing right now and what the future landscape might look like. We also have a great conversation about phones, which if you're a phone nerd like I am, then I think you'll get a kick out of. That'll also be the last episode. So anyways, I hope you enjoy it. I'd like to thank my patrons. My patrons get a podcast. The podcast is all the episodes condensed into one. It drops the same day that the first video drops. And if you're looking for a podcast format, the podcast tier starts at $3. It's not a lot. That gets you anywhere from 4 to 5 podcasts per month. And I don't know, if you're interested, check it out. Link in the description below. I hope that you all have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.